So the Pi4 hit the shelves a little earlier than planned, but has the Pi Foundation addressed all the nagging issues that we've seen in the Pi3? For the regular viewers of my channel, you'll know that when I review an SBC, I don't just do the easy tests, I tend to put it through its paces. Ooh. What? Okay, maybe not that extreme. So I had originally planned to get my wife to do this little JLC PCB ad, but she's left the country. JLC PCB is one of the sponsors of this channel. They can produce 1 to 6 layer boards from 0.4 to 2mm thickness, track widths down to 3.5mm, via drill size down to 0.2mm, and can handle BGAs, controlled impedance, cutouts, gold fingers, and even offer a panelization service. And you get all that for only $2 for 5 PCBs in any color, manufactured in 24 hours. Click on the link in the description below to check them out. Okay, so this is something I've been waiting for a long time. Pretty much half the world has been waiting for this. Oh, and yes, I've cut myself again. Let's crack it open and see what it is. So I bought 2 of the Raspberry Pi 4 2GB models. So I really need to give these a run for their money and see if all the issues that have been plaguing the Raspberry Pi 3 have been fixed in this particular revision. So let's crack one of them open. Oh, yeah, look, open here. Huh. Wow. Okay, so this is the mighty Raspberry Pi 4. Now, there's been quite a lot of videos covering all the features of this particular board. I probably don't really need to go through them all, but heck, I might as well just to be thorough. But let's just fast forward it and get it all over and done with. Okay, so starting from the top right and working clockwise, we have
Ethernet, USB 3.0, USB 2.0, the old familiar 4-pin jack providing audio and composite video, and 2-lane MIPI CSI, 2 HDMI ports capable of 4K at 60Hz, USB Type-C power, woohoo! Finally! 2-lane MIPI DSI, and the standard 40-pin Pi header. We're going to check this out later. And finally, the PoE header.
On the semi side, we have a BCM 54213, which is a dedicated gigabit transceiver. This is pretty much a typical Ethernet IC, but does have the ability to check for cable problems, amongst other things. Something, probably just a chunky diode of some description. A VL805Q6, which is a 4-port USB hub that connects back to the main sock via PCIe. So one of the main problems with the Pi 3 is I/O speeds. It's good to see this being fixed. Another photo of something random. I don't know, it's a 25 MHz crystal. Okay, moving on. I really need to remember why I took some of these photos. I've no idea what this is, but looks pretty, I guess. Oh, okay. These are more than likely small MOSFETs, because pin 46 of the VL805 is an output signal controlling power to the first USB port. 2GB DDR4 RAM, but as I predicted in my April Fool's video, we have a choice of 1, 2 or 4GB RAM. Not sure what these are, but possibly some regulators for the HDMI, considering there's a MOSFET nearby, or else China spy chips. And the MXL7704 that we saw introduced on the Pi 3. And judging by the look of things, not much else has changed around the power side. We have a jumper, and we have the same Wi-Fi and Bluetooth module with an identical antenna design as the Pi 3. So not much has really changed there. Okay, so enough of the top side. On the back side we have, well, not much going on here really. There's possibly a few ESD ICs, a few regulators, a China spy chip or two. Hey, but this is interesting. A mysterious header. It's labelled J5 on the PCB, an SMD header of some sort with 1mm spacing. Pins 2 and 5 are connected to ground, and I traced all the others right back to the sock. So it's possibly some sort of JTAG port, who knows. It's certainly not used as part of the manufacturing process because the SMD pad pitch is too small and it would have pogo pin marks on the solder in the same way as the test points. If anyone has a better idea, let me know in the comments below. Okay, so going back to the USB-C power for a moment, Tyler Ward wrote a pretty good article about the USB-C design on the Pi4. In summary, the current design will cause problems with certain cables, in particular E-marked USB-C cables, or laptop chargers, Thunderbolt cables, and any 5 amp capable charging cable. Using one of these cables will cause the Pi4 to not boot. This is pretty interesting because the Pi Foundation have also released a micro USB to USB-C adapter. This allows the use of the older micro USB adapters to be used with the new Pi4. So I'm pretty sure they knew about the USB-C design guff. The question is, when will it be fixed? I doubt we'll be seeing something this year, so we'll be left with this nagging issue for some time. But who knows? So 5.1 volts at 3 amps. That's a fair amount of kick. And interestingly, they've reduced it from 5.2 volts to 5.1 volts. So the first thing I'm really interested to see is exactly how much power is required to boot this thing. So what I'm going to do is connect this up to a log 4 USB and gradually crank down the power supply amperage and see what the minimum is that can actually viably boot this thing up. Okay, so what I'm doing is keeping the USB Type-C cable as short as possible. You would have seen in one of my other videos how cable length can actually affect the voltage at the end. It might be reading 5.1 volts here, but it's probably not 5.1 volts depending on the length and also the quality of the cable. So I've got a fairly good quality cable and I'm keeping it as short as possible. So the voltage that comes out here would be fairly close to the voltage that comes out here. So let's slowly crank down the current that is being supplied to the Raspberry Pi and see what happens. Nice. It's dropped down to 5.07 volts, but it's pretty close to the 5.1 volts. Notice I haven't connected up Ethernet because I'm interested at this stage to see exactly how much current you can get away with. Maybe 1.5, but let's keep cranking it down and see. Okay, so I'm setting the current to 2.8 amps. Let's see if that actually works. Okay, so that seemed to work quite well. So let's reduce it down to maybe 2.5 amps and see how that goes. So this is where I managed to hit a boot loop. There just wasn't enough current to be able to support the Raspberry Pi. So let's just unplug this for a while, bring it back on again and change this to 0.8 amps and see if that is going to be enough for us. Turn it off, plug it in, and let's see. Okay, so once again we're hitting a boot loop. 800 milliamps is not enough, so let's do this again. 0.9 amps and see what that does. So you can power your Pi off a 900 milliamp wall wart only if you're running a keyboard and mouse and really not too much on the CPU. So I'm actually interested to see just how low we can get this Raspberry Pi 4. So I'm going to look at underclocking the Pi 4 and see what the absolute minimum is that we can get to. Okay, so what I've done is I've changed the boot config so that it sets the maximum clock rate to 300 megahertz, and you can see here that it's also in power save mode. Not that it's going to do much. So let's crank down the current and see how low we can get it. So last time I had it set to 900 milliamps, so let's see if we can boot off that first. Okay, so it's stuck once again in a boot loop. So obviously setting the clock rate in the Raspberry Pi config, it must be starting up in a high clock rate and then dropping back down to a lower clock rate. So let's go to 800 milliamps and see if that will actually function. Okay, so 800 milliamps at 300 megahertz seems to be a goer. And yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, so I'm really interested to see whether the Raspberry Pi Foundation has actually fixed up the issue of SD card corruption. It's a little bit of a hard thing to address, but what I'm going to do is simulate power loss on a Raspberry Pi. So I'll boot it up, pull the SD card out every so often, and see if I can get that SD card to be corrupted. So I've just booted it up, and then I'm just going to rip it out, put it back in again. All the really dodgy sort of things that you do to try and get this SD card to be corrupted. Okay, power it off, power it up again, wait for a little bit, take it out, put it in, take it out, put it in, try and kill this thing. So boot it up, shut it down, boot it up, wait for a little bit, shut it down. I'm determined to try and kill this thing. Okay, that should be enough times. Let's boot it up and see if it's actually been corrupted. Okay, so I haven't been able to successfully corrupt the card, even if I take it out, put it back in. So this is a running system, power it off, power it on again. I can't really get it to be corrupted, but then again, there's not a lot of writing to the SD card when it's booting. So let's write a whole lot of data to the SD card and see if I can get it to be corrupted. Okay, so I picked off a random number generated file, so let's just kill the power and see what happens. Now boot it back up again. Okay, so I'm really having a hard time trying to get this thing to die. Maybe if I write to the MS-DOS boot petition, I might be able to get that to die. It's not very big, so I might just do a whole lot of read and writes and see if I can kill it that way. Okay, so that should do it. Let's see if killing the power halfway through actually does it. Okay, I really can't get this card to be corrupted in any way. Tried writing to the SD card boot petition continuously. I've tried writing to the Linux file system, shutting it down, starting it up multiple times. I just cannot get this SD card to be corrupted. So I think that's a bit of a winner for the Raspberry Pi Foundation. They've managed to solve the SD card corruption issue, which is nice. So I'm interested to see just how hot this CPU gets at this clock rate. So I'm just going to chuck a black marker on to reduce the emissivity of the top of this CPU, hopefully. And let's see the temperature. So it's sitting at a maximum of around 42 degrees, which is fairly comfortable. But bear in mind this is at a clock rate of 300 megahertz. If you want to be able to run your Pi 4 at a lower clock rate, for whatever reason, conserving power, then this is actually a fairly viable option. So anyway, let's move on. Okay, so time for the photonics tests. So first I'll run the small PT test with my super duper heatsink, and then I'll run the small PT test without a heatsink to see what sort of difference it makes. And now it's time for my super duper heatsink. Do, 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 do. Bum, 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 bum. Okay. So you can see the temperature is really getting up there. It's currently 57.5, 59. It's getting pretty hot now. And we may even see the thermal shutdown, hopefully. So without the heatsink, the sock went up to 63.8 degrees Celsius. And with the heatsink, the maximum temperature was 45.3. So that's a big difference, 18.5 degrees Celsius. But you know, the Raspberry Pi 4 still was able to cope with getting up to 63, 64 degrees Celsius and still sort of chugging along. So that's pretty good. Alright, so let's move on to GPIO tests. We've got a bunch of I2C buses and we've also got a bunch of SPI buses. So let's check those out. Okay, so by default we don't have any I2C buses enabled apart from the first one. So I'll need to enable all the other I2C buses. You can do this simply by adding these lines to the /boot/config.txt file. These are just simple overlay files. Okay, so once I powered down and back up again, I could see all the I2C buses. And if I tried to scan on all the buses, nothing really came up. And interestingly, bus 4 and 5 don't actually have any I2C termination on it. So that's something to bear in mind if you're attaching anything to those buses. Okay, let's see how many I2C devices we can connect up and access. So I've got 6 I2C sensors connected up. 4 of them are temperature sensors and 2 of them are lux sensors. So some simple Python code, I can access all the I2C buses at the same time without any issue. That's a lux sensor. Oh, better not short it out. So you can see it's working really nicely. So one of the issues with the previous Pi models is the inability to be able to run both a TFT and an HDMI display at the same time. So it'll be interesting to see if I can actually do that, run both HDMI displays as well as an SPI display. So let's try it out. Okay, so this is pretty impressive. I've got 2 800 by 480 LCD HDMI displays and a plain SPI based display, which is I think it's 160 by 240 or something like that. So it's pretty jitter free playing a video. You can see it's a bit out of step between the SPI device and the HDMI screens, but you know, that's pretty good. So I had a bit of trouble configuring these 2 HDMI devices, and I discovered that sometimes if you've got a different resolution on each of these 2 HDMI ports, the Pi actually hangs, it doesn't boot properly. So I don't know what that is, but that's something to bear in mind if you've got a different monitor on each of these HDMI interfaces. So I've currently got these powered off an independent USB device, so I'm going to see how they go powered directly off the Pi 4, because the Pi 4 now has some decent power management. Okay, a bit of an issue. It certainly doesn't crash the Pi, but it certainly can't power everything all at once. So, competition time. As I mentioned in a previous video, I no longer advertise competitions, but place them in my videos as it tends to reward the regular viewers more. However, this time I'll be giving away one of my 2 gig Pi 4s to a lucky patron. If you're not a patron already, you can sign up over at Patreon or via PayPal on my website. All you have to do is name the video that was playing on the 2 TFT displays during my tests, and let me know in the comments below or by email at this address. And remember, the competition is only open to patrons. So what do I think of the Pi 4? Well, one of the biggest issues with the Pi platform is that it's starting to be its own worst enemy. They have to one-up the previous release, and that becomes harder and harder as time goes on. However, they certainly address a lot of the nagging issues that the previous Pis had. For example, I/O speed is definitely a massive improvement and makes the Pi a nice little NAS setup. And the multi-display and extra RAM will be great for those wanting to use the Pi as a desktop. Also, the extra RAM will give more breathing room to run Docker clusters. In terms of downsides, there's a real lack of extra GPIO features. Sure, the extra I2C, SPI and UART buses are nice to have, but the Pi is lacking real-time capabilities that the BeagleBone has had for years. A small FPGA would have been great in there, or even a small Arduino, but of course this would have raised the cost a fair amount. It would have been great to see some sort of soft power options like we see on some of the other SBCs. And of course the elephant in the room is the USB Type-C design flaw. It will be interesting to see how they handle that one, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Apart from those downsides, I still think the Pi 4 is great bang for your buck, considering it has a large community supporting it. So that about wraps it up for this video. Stay tuned for another video where I start looking at Phoronix benchmarks. Thanks for watching, and see you next week. Ah! Oh, hang on. Didn't even land properly. Ah! You little bugger. What is wrong with this thing? Okay, I really want to see if this thing still works, with a nice big chunk taken out of it. So I expect fireworks to happen. It starts? Oh man, this is cool. Okay, so I've got everything connected up, got Ethernet, got keyboard, mouse and HDMI. I'm going to plug this in first, and then I'll plug it into the wall socket. No, it's not really working. I did get a black screen, but nothing else. Probably the 5 volt line's out. Who knows? No, that's a bit of a shame.